Hello, people. This is another Fanny interview. And today we have here Helen Pluckrose. She is the editor of Areo Magazine and co-author of the Grievance Studies with James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian. It's going to talk a little bit about, or a lot, of postmodernism and these studies. Welcome, Helen, and thank you for coming to
Yeah,
clarify just a little bit about those issues.
yeah, it's good to talk to you.
So let's talk about a little bit about the studies first, and then you can give us the follow up on the magazine with you following your work. Okay. I want
Righto.
to to
Okay.
just give us an idea of what is your education and how you got to get into this postmodernism theory based studies.
Now, my background is in literature, so it was literary theory that introduced me to postmodernism. I like I look at early modern and late medieval women's religious writing, and in order to look at literature at all, I found that I had to keep using different kinds of theory, queer theory, feminism, psychoanalytical, and I became quite worried about postmodernism at that point. At the same time as I was sort of getting pushed, I felt, out of feminism. I felt feminism, which was my move forever, was going in the wrong direction.
That's really nice because it is has happened a split in between a lot of movements on the left, no, because of
Yes.
mainly because of the methodology of those movements, the movement, not just the movement but the studies as well, and you're more into the scientific side of that.
Yes.
So what raised the hypothesis to start the grievance studies?
Well, we'd been quite worried about a lot of the scholarship that was coming out of certain fields of identity and cultural studies, which drew on postmodern ideas. And we tried to raise these concerns openly. We'd written essays about them. We'd had talks. We invited people to come and join us at talks, and we couldn't get the grievance scholars to talk to us. And we wanted to show that there was a problem. A lot of liberal lefties really don't want to be critical of something that seems to be social justice related. The idea of social justice, you don't want to be against social justice. So we wanted to show that there really is quite a serious problem that is undermining the aim for social justice.
Yeah, it is a rising subject in all the fields, mainly like the social justice warriors that are
Mm.
trying to produce all these theory bases based studies, and the other side that is trying to be more rational, more logical, and attached to like really into the evidence base and a proper methodology, a proper scientific methodology. Because I think a little bit that you could elucidate for us in the postmodernism, like how was this history of the postmodernism to become like kind of tainted, or in an analogy or comparison with the same thing on this on the fights of the feminists that has lost a little bit of the purpose of equality, I would say.
Mm. Yeah, there are three main currents at the moment with feminism and with sort of scholarship into equality issues generally. And so we had, first of all, the Marxists, the materialists. So they believe in an objective truth. They're interested in government, law, economics. Now, I don't fully agree with them generally because they have a very sort of quite simplistic view of society in economic terms with oppressed and oppressor classes, but they are different to the postmodernists. And then there are scholars who really sort of try not to have any ideology at all. They're generally sort of aiming at understanding society without tainting it as far as they can with their own ideology. And of course, there are liberal feminists and anti-racists as well. So there's quite a mix where you get people who have, if they're coming from the Marxist perspective, then they're probably writing about classes of people and conflict between them. If they're coming from the postmodern perspective, they're looking at discourses, ways of talking about things, attitudes and biases, and they're reading this in a very theoretical way. And then, there are empirical scholars who don't sort of adhere to either ideology very strongly, and of course what we don't have very much of at all is conservatives. So it is quite messy, but it's the postmodernists that we're particularly worried about at the moment, because they are really undermining the idea of objective truth, of empirical data. The claim that that evidence and reason and positivism, as they call it, is a white Western construct that oppresses everybody else. Apart from anything else, that's quite racist. To suggest that science and reason belong to white Western men is both sexist and racist.
Apparently, the things that you guys have taken as examples and then produced your grievance studies and published and be recognized by them, later on they said you guys were abusing the system of manipulating data towards some theory-based idea already set, and that is the problem with those studies. But they don't recognize they are the ones that start doing it.
Yes,
they actually
precisely.
claim that the white cis male man normative is, there's so many. I always talk to people about how I feel confused with so many little titles and names. Before it was just so easy to say heterosexual, normal, homosexual, man, woman, and and now there are so many titles and little genders and stuff that when you try to call people with, it sounds like you're swearing at them, you're calling their names.
That's a part of the whole sort of postmodern idea is that categories have been culturally constructed in order to perpetuate power. So an awful lot of the kinds of theories which stem from there are about complicating categories. And that's particularly the case in queer theory and to quite an extent in post-colonial theory as well. The understanding is that if we don't have these categories in the first place, then nobody can be oppressed by not fitting into them. Whereas the liberal approach, of course, would be to understand that some people are gay, some people are trans, and everybody just needs to get over it. That would be the liberal approach to these things. We don't feel like we have to destroy categories. I mean, obviously, categories should be questioned. They should be tested. Homosexuality was considered a disorder. That's there's no reason to think that. So these categories do need to be looked at, but we don't need to blow everything up in order to try to make people who don't fit the mold not feel under pressure to do so, because we can just accept that people don't fit the mold.
Yeah, and if the first category was bad, why would we just create so many more? It just sounds like almost paradoxical or an oxymoron. Like if categories are bad, titling people or tagging people because of whatever they do in their personal life is bad, why would you create another 100 categories to do that to other people and then exclude them? I think it's very segregational when you try to split people into like that, and apparently they are actually doing the thing that is bad as well.
Yes, I see what you mean. Within queer theory, they don't tend to make up those labels. The labels we hear with the sort of multiple forms of gender come very much from activists. But yes, within things like intersectionality, then there's this concept of positionality. So it's not that they say they're not making an essence of men or women or black people or white people, but they're thinking about their position. So if somebody is to say, I am a black lesbian woman and I am speaking as such, then she's calling on all these different identities that she has in relation to power in order to position herself as somebody who's experiencing multiple forms of marginalization. But as you say, and as I agree, I think that dividing people so much into identity is much more divisive than liberating.
Yes, definitely. Mainly when they try to stop, like you said, they try to like, oh, I'm a black lesbian woman, and I don't would not accept a straight white woman to talk about the same subject. They start trying to enter into like some type of intellectual intersectionality and identitarianism that splits even more people. You know, I always talk about trying to drop those walls. I think all those labels and categories actually keep like religions and people that love are so passionate about their team in Brazil, like soccer teams, make people kill each other. So I think all those labels actually are dividing the people as humans, you know, as the equal we are. We should just drop all these walls and so like religions and other beliefs that make people so passionate and like really go to like even violent. And we see that movement in between the political agenda, the political parties, and the left right beliefs on social issues too. I think this is actually creating more division in the United States, for example, like the racial issues, the sexual, social, gender pronouns issues sometimes are dividing people into their own field, like in their own area, like environment, like in the schools, in the colleges. We see that discussion being very sometimes becoming violent, and I think that is the importance of talking about this. And I have a background that on my YouTube channel I have approached the pseudoscience talk because of NoFap movement and the last years. I think the most important thing about talking about scientific studies is because we all learn that, oh, scientific studies bring us some knowledge, and we all start like kind of believing in studies. So like just like, oh, there is a paper that says this, and everybody, oh yeah, good. Don't even go. Uh, Recently, people don't even go through the methodology. They just see the title and read the results, and yes, it's true. So we forgot that these last decades, there is a lot of pseudoscience being produced. So you cannot just take the title and take the results and conclusions and say like, oh, this is true, because there's a lot of broken studies with broken methodology. And I think you guys came to open up for this type of discussion that not all studies, not all scientific studies are valuable or valid nowadays. And then you guys get attacked to be grifters. And then because of a lot of people do not understand your work, you guys kind of like have all these attacks taken as serious by a lot of people that just don't understand the importance of this talk, of this subject. So
that tends to be how I see it. Yes.
yeah, I think I have been called a lot of names because today the polarization of the subjects to like pro-life or pro-choice, and the other side will always attack before even listening to the arguments. So another day I was in a conversation and someone said, "Oh, so you pro-abortion?" And I was like, just to see how you already strawman my position, you don't even say that I'm pro-choice. You say I'm pro-abortion. Sounds like I'm going outside and killing babies of moms that don't even want to go through it. And I think that, like I was pointing, like I think everybody is pro-choice and it is pro-abortion. So these two titles are very polarizing, and it's the two sides not being able to talk. And we are in the I think we are in the edge of this conversation of like why we need to talk about any subject. And it's the other thing that you have been involved too with Peter Boghossian, and that is his book I have here. He just confirmed, I think it's going to show up on the recording, that he just confirmed the interview for another week. And and how much attack because of this we're talking now, like people misunderstand your work and your purpose of talking about this and doing a fake study, but to show up that not all studies are valid. How much attack, personal attack, and pressure on social media you suffer? Let's know a little bit.
Yeah, I'm having to step away from Twitter mostly now. I have some committed stalkers, so I have an awful lot of people blocked and muted, but they still get through. So I think there's quite a drive. We are seen as part of the problem. And what they really want to do is to show that we are illegitimate, that we're not actually liberals who care about gender, race, or LGBT equality. We are just reactionary rightists who are anti-equality, because that would be much easier than accepting us as people who seek equality but don't think that their methods work. So, I mean, when you were saying earlier, we're talking about the divisive nature of things, the reality of humans, we have to accept that there is a human nature. And Nicholas Christakis has just released a wonderful book about this, The Blueprint for making a society, which looks at how human societies work and don't work, when they thrive and when they don't. And it's a reality, unfortunately, that we are quite tribal, that we have in-groups and out-groups. So to mitigate this, we really need an overarching kind of consensus that brings out the best of us. So if something like liberalism, where you don't evaluate by race, gender, or sexuality, that enables you to kind of push out your circle of empathy further. You can then the good qualities of humans, the things that make us do well in mixed societies, is, you know, our sense of justice, our sense of equality, our empathy, our shared humanity. This all comes from liberal ideas. With the social justice ideas, so much dividing people into groups who can know about this and can't know about this, can speak and can't speak. It's really activating the worst and most tribal aspects of ourselves that we've seen quite traditionally from conservative groups, from white nationalists, from patriarchal sort of frameworks, people who want to divide us into superior and inferior groups, in groups and out groups. And really the liberals have got to try and push back against both of them. And unfortunately, what is calling itself social justice at the moment has quite a lot of social prestige and legitimacy. And I think it's going to cause more problems before we can get it sort of restrained a bit.
It is quite important to also point the idea of like how those two movements that you pointed, they are actually bad because of the authoritarianism in them, no? Because like some people try to like demonize and like you said, the polarizing scenario of United States today, and that is in the media all the time, and people are talking about left and right and whites and blacks, that the idea of even like the white supremacists or the Black Lives Matter, they are both bad because they both authoritarian and they are both violent groups, and the idea of the first liberal, that the liberals also had this split, because not all are actually, in fact, libertarians. Lots of them are like oppressing the other side, or fighting. Like what I see most of the time, and sometimes I try to point, and then I have been called a white supremacist, even though I'm not a white person. But because I see a lot of, like, for example, in the Black Lives Matter, something very bad. We don't fight. I don't think we is a right way to fight racism with racism. And when I see, like, for example, groups of Black ladies saying, like, oh, we want to do an exclusionary meeting. I I actually don't think that it's promoting any type of equality, or to live it to live in equality together. If you're really going to stop people from coming to your meeting because of their color, is exactly the meaning, the meaning of the word racism. So you're discriminating someone by color, by sex, because some of those are exclusionary by sex too. They actually portray men as rapists. A lot of feminist groups say all men are rapists, and those generalizations are the problem that we had before, when heterosexual people would say, like, all homosexuals are bad, all homosexuals are this or that. And then now those groups sometimes are fighting in the same way that is not even a little bit better. So what is your experience as being inside the group? You see that a lot. You try to fight, and you are called out a lot because of that.
Yes. Yeah, I think. Oh, we're echoing a bit again. Okay, so yeah, I mean, when we're talking here, you're talking about reciprocity here, because what a social justice activist would say in response to that is that this is a false equivalence, that Black people can't be racist, that women can't be sexist, and they'll say this because they're working on power structures. They're not working on the liberal sense of treat people as you'd want to be treated. I think they're thinking about the consequences of this.
Well, I think you just cut a little bit.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a kind of retributory.
But
I'm much more worried about white supremacists than I am about Black Lives Matter. I think that if we want to criticize anti-racist activists or feminists for being racist or sexist to white people or men, then yes, we can address that principle. We don't need to think that for example, white people are as badly affected by racism as Black people are. The history, particularly of America, is very much with Blacks as a second-class citizens, and even not citizens for the beginning. So we're looking at situations where there is a core of truth, but there's a very bad and counterproductive reaction to it. And I also think that we have to stick to the principles of liberalism and not respond to racism with racism or sexism with sexism, but trying to understand the difference in the world view, where you can't say things like not all men, or you can't say that certain things are racist if it's against a majority group. Yes, we need to understand how this system works, and then be able to say quite clearly, I don't accept your premises. I don't think this is going to reduce racism or sexism. I think we need to stick to consistently liberal principles, because otherwise we're just talking past each other, and the whole sort of all lives matter thing. It does have a point. We should be more concerned about certain groups in society. That doesn't mean that it's helpful to think in terms of a monolithic privileged group and a monolithic oppressed group, and to blame people by their identity. So we see a lot. I've just been listening to Kate Mann's book, and she speaks about white American women who voted for Trump. And then she says, what were we thinking? Why did we do this? Well, she clearly didn't. She's writing a book now about the problems with Trump. She clearly didn't vote for him. And the idea that you can share a collected blame with people who share your skin color is really quite dangerous. It's quite nasty. If there's something like a religion, then there's a little bit more justification for that. But when it's something like skin color or sex, it's a really horrible way to go. It's the sins of the fathers is what it comes down to, and that seems to be something that makes intuitive sense to us as well. But it's very counterproductive for equality aims.
So one of the most talked of the grievance studies was the dog's paper. And we need to at least give a little touch of it for people to understand a little bit of what is about. Can you give us a little explanation?
Yeah, everybody loves the dog part paper. We argued in that one, we claimed to have examined 10,000 dog genitals, and then to be able to tell by the way humans reacted to their dogs that there was sexism and a rape culture. And we ended by advocating training men like dogs. And it was nonsense from start to finish. It had ludicrous things in it, such as that we couldn't really tell what sex the dogs were because they weren't able to tell us their gender, and that we couldn't really understand them because we come from a positionality as humans and not dogs. And so it's absolutely, we thought that one really wouldn't, that was the one that just seemed most likely to get called out as a hoax. And of course that is the one that sunk us in the end, not because the journals recognized it as a problem, but because journalists did, the public did. So yeah, that was how we got caught.
And I think a little bit that we can clarify for people to understand that in the scientific study, you have the hypothesis. So you actually have many hypotheses that you actually trying to prove and disprove. And in the theory-based studies, you actually start with the conclusion. You really believe that you're going to find that result, and then you build your methodology to prove your point. So that's what I have tried to talk to people about. Like, not all scientists are going to be honest on their biases, or not putting their biases in those studies, or not using this type of broken methodology to prove what they already believe. Sometimes what is happening most of the time with those so hot topic subjects of nowadays that are so divisive, no? And would you say that the postmodernism would be the cause of a little bit of the lack, or people looking at be more objectivist?
I think it's the idea of discourses, which I mean, it's present in Derrida with his focus on language and interpretation, and in Lyotard with his sort of expansion of the idea of language games, but mostly in Foucault. So we've got discourses, which are ways of talking about things, and the postmodernists believe that knowledge is a construct of these ways of talking about things. So now there is a belief that underlying all of society are these frameworks of sexism, of racism, of homophobia, and that the job of the theorist is to find them. So they're not even hiding the fact that they're going in to their investigation with the assumption. And I mean, there's a wonderful example. It's terrifying, of anti-racist activists that we've got on Areo, one of Mike Naina's videos, in which they say the question is not did racism take place, but how did racism manifest in this situation? So that is really a simple way to get your head around what it is. There must be, you and I are speaking to each other now, and I am white and you are not. There must be between us a racial imbalance. I must be in my speech somehow denigrating you. And the job of the theorist would be to look at what we are saying and to find the racism in our exchange. And when she's found that, then her job is done. There isn't a possibility that she could be mistaken or misinterpreting, because we know it's there.
Yes, I had a friend that used to argue with me about those subjects, and I was normally telling her that she had that she had some type of lens or glasses, that she was actually selecting things when she looked at, like, for example, we would go to a course, and she would point like, oh, I did not see many girls, or I did not see many black people. And I was like, wow, that is so racist that you actually looking around, looking for these examples all the time and pointing it, because you actually probably being very biased on the positivation, like you probably not looking at the places where you actually see a lot of girls and a lot of black people, you dismissing those places, and because it is an issue that I see, for example, with feminism. Oh, we need to put more girls in this place. What about that place where there are more girls? Should we try to balance and put more? Oh, no, forget that. Don't talk about it. So I think it is a little bit dishonest on the way that they select. It's like a little bit cherry picking or picking and choosing um, cases. And I have talked about how this is actually dangerous. I follow a lot of people that are independent media and keep pointing to some big media producers, even in YouTube channels, that actually want to portray, like, they pick and choose cases of police brutality against black people, and then they portray. And nowadays we have, I would say, a majority of the population believe the police brutality is racial driven. It's a racial issue, when we are actually not looking at the other cases, and we are having like too much focus in some type of narrative. And I don't know, what is your view about that?
I think that idea of confirmation bias, that science is generally set up to avoid. So that's the purpose of trying to falsify your own hypothesis. It's the reason for the need for replication. But within these theoretical disciplines, that isn't there at all. An undergraduate, when studying literary theory, they actually spoke in those same terms that you just did, of having different lenses on. So you would put on your Marxist lens, and then you would read the text through that. You would only pick the bits that fitted a Marxist analysis, and then you could do it again with a feminist one, with a psychoanalytical one, with a queer one. And this is understood not as confirmation bias, as cherry picking, as it seems to the average person who wants to get an accurate picture of things, but as different ways of reading in order to get different perspectives, because no perspective is actually right or objective. So a feminist reading and a queer reading are both add layers that weren't there before. And this really runs counter to the idea that, yes, people can have different perspectives and different experiences, but it's an oversimplification hugely to say that these relate to immutable characteristics. And it's a problem to recognize these as alternate knowledges rather than perspectives, and to really reject the concept of an objective truth of the matter at all. With things like sexism, racism, police brutality, discrimination, there must be objective truths to find. If there are, we need to find them. We can't do that if we're reading things theoretically.
Yes, my main issue about those narratives is because even if you find examples, like we find examples of police brutality against all the races, but if we try to frame as police brutality being a systematic problem, and the systematic problem is because all the police, all the departments, or the entire system is racist toward blacks, we actually we are producing a narrative against cops that have been important. We know that Black Lives Matter, or not specific the group, but people from listen to this type of narratives, have demonized cops as an entire class. So they look at when I look at police, I think, well, they are workers and they are doing their job. And what this type of narrative produces is like cops are bad, kill cops. kill police because they are racist. So I'm really afraid and scared of this type of narratives and this type of media that focus on producing this type of, I would say, propaganda. When they are on YouTube and they can be reached all the time, and people are reproducing that, spreading that type of message in this mainly on the way, because like I do like talking street epistemology, and the other day in the group I was trying to point to them that even if you find an example of a racist cop committing a racist crime, a racist police brutality against a Black person, I don't think is right to make the connection to the system and say the system is producing this. No,
if there is a consistent
the
problem of
correlation is complicated.
I don't know myself whether the police brutality that we see in the US, the shootings have a racial element or not, or to what extent. I think Sam Harris had quite a podcast about this. We're looking at the data that I can't remember. With you generally that yes, the idea we are looking at systems, that we're seeing actions in terms of power dynamics and groups rather than individuals is a problem for generalizations.
Like all men are rapists. Some feminist groups like to try to spread this message, and when actually they are dismissing the point that we want to talk about this, but we want to be able to address to the real issue, to be able to solve the real problem. Like I've seen some feminists turning sides in Sweden, because a lot of feminists, like it has been raising the feminists there, because the rape culture with the mass immigration has been double, triple numbers, and more into gang rapes, and feminists just saying like all men are dangerous, and when it's less than 1% of men population, the male population, is actually committing all the crimes. And when we come to talk about the real issue, we are racist, we Islamophobic, we this or that, so I think the most important thing of like setting this conversation is to show that both sides want to fix the problem, both sides want the best and want to solve the problem, and that's what we should get together to do it.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think we do need some acceptance. I'm willing to accept that social justice activists want the solutions to things. I disagree with them that things like rape are caused by a cultural acceptance of rapists. This isn't the reality at all. This rape is an abhorred crime. So I think where they're aiming to address systems and discourses which they think allows for rape and encourages it and condones it, I disagree strongly. And I think that I think it's clear that rapists are people who are going against societal norms. And so looking at a system or a sex is not going to be the way to fix the problem. Perhaps mental health, perhaps sociopathy, perhaps criminal behavior, perhaps subcultures, all different kinds of elements which could explain why a small minority of men commit violent sexual offences. But blaming men for it, we can't have less men. We can we have to actually address the problem of sexual offenders.
Yes, because sometimes what happens is like when you open this conversation, a lot of people will immediately attack you of being a rapist apologist. And you're like, no, I want actually to address this problem and we be able to fix. If it's a cultural problem, if there is a way to be fixed, we are seeking for that. And I think a little bit of you wrote one of the last articles in your magazine. I want you to talk a little bit about that before we finish. It is talking about that. It's talking about how those type of wrong measures can be dangerous to society in general. Like, can you give us a little bit about the magazine, what you talk or what is more important for you over there?
Right. Okay. In Areo, we try to have a range of arguments. So we have some conservatives, we have some socialists, we have a lot of liberals who span the divide from left liberals to classical liberals who are more towards the right. And we're evidence based. This is our scope. We want arguments that are reasoned. We want them that are evidence based. They're broadly liberal in the sense of being for freedom and equality, not in the sense of being left wing, and humanist. So we have that kind of scope. I've written quite a few pieces for it with this aim of looking at society through a liberal and humanist perspective. So I think the essay that you were referring to of mine was the one about agoraphobia, where we have androphobia, where we have a real sort of fear of men as all part of one system of patriarchy and misogyny and rape culture. And I think this is really inducing a kind of mental illness on people. It's of course Jonathan Haidt with Greg Lukianoff, they've written The Coddling of the American Mind, and they're looking at how this kind of rhetoric works as reverse cognitive behavioral therapy. So whereas cognitive behavioral therapy will teach you not to catastrophize, to put things in perspective, to try to engage with society better, then this kind of fear-inducing narrative where women are really taught that society is hostile to them, it's dangerous to them, that men are all part of some system that wants to hurt, limit, discriminate against, rape and murder them, is really it goes against the idea of feminism as I know it, which was about female empowerment. Yes, we address issues that hold women back. We don't invent them. We need to address this problem as it is. We need to address the problem of criminals, not the problem of men.
Yeah. So, Helen, I only have to thank you very much for coming and clarifying and exposing. I actually just wanted you to talk about this again. You have several videos of you, Peter, James, and so many other people trying to talk free speech and reason and epistemology and individualism for people to actually be open-minded to at least discuss about those subjects that are so important nowadays. So I'm going to keep following you. Please let us know how to follow you, or what is the best way to see your work in the best form.
Right. Well, I'm most active, and the best way to talk to me is generally on Twitter. That's under H Pluckrose. You can find my work in Areo Magazine. If you search Helen Pluckrose Areo, you'll get taken to my author page. Then there are the videos of Mike Nainer. If you want to see what we've been doing, and also Brett Weinstein and Heather Hying, and the situation more broadly, you should go to YouTube, Mike Nainer channel, and he's set everything out, and he has viewing lists in order as well. So that's a really good resource for people trying to understand what's going on here.
That's really good.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, and yeah, keep it up with the good work, and let's go. I want to thank everybody for coming, and please follow Ellen, send her questions, be open for the conversation, try to be open to listen to the other side and try to understand, because sometimes when you try to understand the other side, we learn some new data that we did not know before. So thank you very much, Ellen, and have a good night, and see you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.